Hello and welcome back. This is Dr. Cassandra Quave, and you're listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious. Today on the show, we have a very special guest. This guest is someone who's written some incredible books that have not only informed me as a scientist, but also continue to inspire my students in their quest for knowledge around the connections between people and plants. Our guest today is Dr. Gary Paul Nabhan. He is a Lebanese American ethnobotanist, conservation biologist, and Franciscan brother living on the US Mexico border. He's globally known for building cross cultural teams for the collaborative conservation of biocultural landscapes and rare foods, medicines, and sacred plants. He's been an author or editor of over 30 books and 120 scientific articles published in the likes of Nature, the Proceedings on the National Academy of Sciences, American Anthropologist, Ethnobiology, and more. He's also written in the lay press for the New York Times, the LA Times, Smithsonian, Food Tank, and Huffington Post. Gary is a pioneer in the slow food, sustainable agriculture, plant pollinator conservation, and ecological restoration movements. He's recently launched a really exciting new initiative entitled Sacred Plant Biocultural Recovery Initiative. His work has been honored by the MacArthur and Takrim Foundations, Chefs Collaborative, Societies for Conservation Biology, Ethnobiology, and Ethnobotany, and Utni Reader named him as one of their innovators, making the world a better place. Gary, it's so great to see you. I'm so glad we were able to get you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Oh, I'm overjoyed to have a conversation with you.
That's awesome. Well, I want to just jump right in because I have so many questions to ask you in a short amount of time. But let's start with just some introduction into what led you to become interested in sacred plants. I know that you've spoken before about your own Arab background has helped in that in cultivating that interest.
Well, I'm from a long line of spice traders that go back to where some of the original Arab clans came from in Yemen and then spread out over the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. And even my uncles and one grandfather was among those spice traders that often sold Lebanese imports to American Arab communities. And so I grew up with all these wonderful aromas around me. And when I was young, I actually thought that all men in my family genetically had the scent of rosewater because whenever they'd hug and kiss me, they smelled like rosewater. And so I grew up with aromas being a signal, as you know, that plants are communicating to us or to pollinators or to other plants. And it took me a while to come back in my career as a plant ecologist to thinking about that mode that aromatic plants have to communicate that may be just as significant or more significant than their mycorrhizal connection.
That's right. I mean, I think that's one of the incredible things about, our capacity as humans to engage with the environment in these sensory ways of, it's the way the plants talk to us through their aromas. Well, and I know too, you are a PhD scientist, but you also have an interesting perspective on your science through your work as an interfaith Franciscan brother. What does that entail and how does that influence your work?
Well, I don't want to make too much of being a Franciscan brother because our motto is go out in the world and make people feel good and share the good news, and only when necessary use words. And so a lot of my work has been with young people. Like my wife and I started a thing called Earth Care Youth Corps that came out of the Franciscan tradition, employing high school kids to go out and do ecological restoration work. But I've also been involved in uh, the Cedars of Lebanon restoration and restoration of sacred plants, both for Christian, Muslim, and Jewish faiths. and indigenous peoples along the border, where the plants that they use in their ceremonies, rituals, and gatherings um, are needed for their expression of religious freedom.
Yeah, that touches on, I think, the fact that so many of these plants have so many different applications. It's not just about the aroma, it's not just about their role in culinary applications, but also ritual, culture, family gatherings. And you've had this incredible opportunity to write about plants from around the world. What are some of your favorite places? I know that right now you're dialing in from a remote area. What are you out doing, and maybe share some highlights from some of the places where you've worked.
Well, right now I'm on the Sonoran Desert coast of the Gulf of California, or Sea of Cortez, where we're helping harvest seeds of mangroves and seagrasses uh, for coastal restoration to help indigenous fishing communities buffer themselves from ocean level rising and climate change. But as I said earlier, I've also been up in the mountains of Lebanon and in the deserts near the empty quarter of the Arabian Peninsula, where frankincense grows, which was at one time the most valuable plant in the world. And those aromas are not analyzed in a secular, materialistic way by their users, the people who use all kinds of incense mixtures, some with 40 to 50 different plants in them. They consider those aromas of incense the tangible sign of the spirits hidden from our eyes but palpable to our other senses.
And speaking of some of these spices, what can you share with us about the historic spice trades? You covered frankincense, whose cultivation is also quite tricky, right? These trees have to be actively managed to keep them in good shape. We also have myrrh in a similar area, is that right? And
That's
what
right.
other yeah, what can you share with us about those? We don't think of them, I think, in the same way that we might have in the past, but they still have, I think, incredible value for local people that use these in their medical traditions.
Well, let's get to the obvious that uh, in every molecule of your body that fruits are medicines and medicines are foods. And when we're healed by them, we feel gratitude spiritually that creation is taking good care of us. And I think one of the things that we have as an odd problem right now in the United States is if you Google sacred plants, you'll probably only see websites about psychedelic plants that, as I said, Catholic, the Jewish and Muslim traditions have a wide range of plants that they use ceremonially, not just as incenses, as do indigenous cultures. And some of those are also the healing plants in the genera plants that you work with for dozens of years. So I'm not telling you anything new that there's blurred boundaries between spiritual and medicinal and culinary.
And what do you think makes a plant a sacred plant? Are all medicinal plants considered sacred, or is it really about their value within a deeper cultural or religious application or spiritual application? How do we draw that line? Or maybe not so much, maybe a line is the wrong term, but how do we kind of think about sacred plants and identify them?
Well, there is a subset of sacred plants called endotheogenic or entheogenic, which means God manifesting plants. And we
Mhm.
could include psychedelics or hallucinogens in those. But other people would argue that sacramental wine with sherry and rue or angelica is something that, when used as a sacrament in the Christian Eucharist, also brings them closer to the Creator. I also think that there's other roles that are deeply touching to me. For instance, there's wild pistachio trees that have been protected for thousands of years in the Middle East. And for a very special reason that you can stand under one of these huge wild pistachios like the mastic tree and gather people who've had conflicts with one another and ask them to take vows of reconciliation there. And I just hope that in the war-torn Middle East right now, the Palestinian Muslims and Christians and Jews might find a tree like that and use it for, in a broader sense, for reconciliation and peacemaking. So the very role that plants play as a witness and as a touchstone for peace, I think is deeply moving.
No, I absolutely agree. I'm often inspired by the use of Piper methysticum in a similar way of kava kava. You know, this is a plant that's not a hallucinogen, but it's something that's used in a ceremony. It's something that people in the Pacific use. They bring it to gatherings. There's respect and honor given to the earth and to the you know people in attendance. It's such a beautiful way of recognizing connection with nature and also coming to an agreement or coming to terms in these negotiations. There's a kind of important role of the plant there, as you said, in
Yeah.
finding a way forward. Yeah.
And I love, as you do, to teach my students through stories and parables that I've
Mhm.
heard indigenous and other spiritual leaders. And one I love that I've heard in almost every part of the world is a saint or a prophet walking through the desert and becoming so tired and being out of water that he or she puts the staff that was a walking stick down in the sand, and all of a sudden it sprouts into a giant pistachio or fig or Corona del Cristo, the jujube that is known as the crown of thorns plant. And so that plants have a resurrection themselves from a walking stick to a living being is a beautiful metaphor for all of us, that plants and animals like butterflies go through a metamorphosis, and hopefully at times in our lives we'll go through the equivalent psychic transformation that spiritual leaders call metanoia, which is becoming renewed.
That's incredible. Well, and I think there's something really special too about these parables in deserts. And I know you've spent a lot of time in different deserts across the globe, from the Arabian Peninsula to the deserts in Arizona and Mexico. You've even written a book about the sense of the desert, the smells, the sensory, engagement with the desert, and I think for many of us listeners, maybe when we think of the desert, we think of just a void. We don't think of a desert being full of life. Maybe you can help us better understand what happens in a desert, like what's going on that gives rise to these amazing diversity of aromas.
Well, deserts are elegant, uncluttered places, and that's why so many people who have contemplative practices go for retreats on desert mountaintops or even around desert oases, because the clutter of daily life doesn't follow you out to those places. But to survive in the desert, plants need to buffer themselves, as all plants do, from both biotic or stress, pressure from wildlife or insects. That we know from our studies of tropical plants that a lot of the phytochemicals are there to resist insect predation. But also, what's obvious in desert is the incredibly daunting stress of heat, solar radiation, and water scarcity. And so, what do plants do to deal with those pressures? They emit volatile oils on their leaf surfaces and sometimes on their trunks and branches and stems that then serves as a deterrent for transpiration or evaporation of water from their leaf surfaces. They also protect the plants from damaging solar radiation, which all of us are vulnerable to. And it also reduces water loss from the leaves in a way that the plants can hold on to the moisture they need to continue growing or surviving long-term droughts. And all of us are in a place where we have to think about extended drought and heat waves. Two-fifths of the U.S. has already hit them. We got 30,000 farm workers more than any year in history, died last year in the heat out in fields harvesting food for our daily bread. And so we really have to think that these desert plants that already have the adaptations to deal with heat and drought might have the antioxidants that we need for helping our own bodies tolerate greater heat and drought stress. And collectively, there's a set of diseases called diseases of oxidative stress that these antioxidants serve as our buffers to capture free radicals and sort of neutralize them. But also, those antioxidants are carried by these volatile oils that probably occur in a larger abundance of desert plants than plants in other parts of the world, or at least are not washed off the plant leaf surfaces as frequently, so they're performing a function. And when we do get rain, of course, we have this wonderful phenomena that I wrote about in my first book, The Desert Smells Like Rain, that all of a sudden you feel like the osmocosm around you has exploded into a symphony of fragrances that is just as beautiful as any symphony you've ever heard with your ears, but this way you take it in by your nose.
That's beautiful. Well, I think, deserts are they really provide, I think, a template for resilience in so many ways. I haven't done a lot of work in deserts. I've worked a bit in a desert oasis in Egypt. I've done some work on very arid, dry islands off the Tunisian coast. And this one particular island is called Pantelleria. It's an Italian island, but you can really see Tunisia on a good day from the coastline. And some of the things that the people who live there have learned to do are just incredible. Like, they build their homes in such a way to keep the homes cooler and to even capture the moisture of the morning dew, that then goes into cisterns under their homes because fresh water is non-existent on the island. They have to bring it in by tanker, but somehow in the past, people learned how to live just by capturing water from, the few rains or from this kind of collection mechanism. And I'm wondering, these are insights I would assume would be really important as we think about how to live in a hotter, drier planet. Do you have any experiences like that you've observed of folks, coming up with really innovative ways to live in these conditions?
Well, your point is really well taken, and I've worked in the Canary Islands at
Mm.
Lanzarote, for example. One of the islands only gets 4 inches of rain each year, that people dig down into the volcanic cinders and cobbles and heave them up on the sides of sort of funnel-like openings in lava fields, and then plant a fig or a guava or pomegranate trees 4 to 6 feet down below the ground surface, and then pile up the cobbles around the base of the tree. And
Wow.
those cobbles can allow fog to condense on the bottom edges of them and drain down to the roots. And now people are using the concept of biomimicry to do massive fog catchers in Morocco. And I was hosted with Colin Curry, who you know, visiting nonprofits in Morocco that are now building giant fog catchers that are providing all the water needs of 14, 15 different villages up in the coastal mountains of Morocco. So by that concept of biomimicry, we can take an ancient technique and imagine other ways to conceptualize that with the materials right where we live. So rather than cultural appropriation, it's encouraging us to use our imagination and the concept of biomimicry to come up with new solutions based on a very ancient one.
That's incredible because, it sounds so similar to what they do in Pantelleria. They don't dig down in the ground, but they take kind of volcanic rock and they build towers around a single tree. And they call these the Pantascan gardens, but it's the same concept. It's about capturing
So
that humidity. They even kind of half bury their grapevines. So they'll kind of dig this cylindrical hole in the ground, and then they have the baseline of where the vine actually starts below ground, and you get this micro environment that requires very little water. It's incredible that desert peoples living in these arid environments throughout history in different parts of the world have learned how to manage water resources. And yeah, it's just incredible, and I think we have a lot to learn from these ancient practices.
That's right, and it is also, something that we can look at plants like prickly pear and say,
Yeah.
"Okay, now, what is a prickly pear doing so that it can live in, areas of 4 inches of rainfall?" Well, it's storing its moisture in complex polysaccharide mucilages that slow down the loss of water from the plant tissue. When we ingest the nopalitos, prickly pear cactus pads or cladodes, and they're delicious. Um, we are taking in that gooey substance. This is much like the goo in okra, and that plays a similar role in our own metabolism of slowing down the digestion and absorption of blood sugars and increasing insulin sensitivity so that really, prickly pears were the first plant that we knew from the New World that had anti-diabetic properties on the basis of these slow-release chemicals. And yet, the Nahuatl and Pima and Tohono people knew that concept from prickly pear cultivation and their own consumption of it for millennia before we could technically describe it.
No, that's incredible, and prickly pear is such a interesting plant because, as you said, it's from the Americas, and yet you find it throughout, the Mediterranean, especially around Sicily and in North Africa. They have an interesting practice here, and I'm curious if you've run across this in the Americas, but in Italian or in Sicilian, they call it "u bastardun." It's like the bastard fruit. Excuse my language for this one. But
Yeah.
basically, the first fruiting, they selectively knock off and feed to pigs and things like that.
And so,
They do it over a series of weeks. And so the second fruiting, which is considered to be the superior fruit, they then use for human consumption. And by staggering the dates, they knock off the first fruiting, they get an extended period of later fruiting. So they have longer periods of being able to harvest and eat this plant. And it just I was like, wow, like, how did they figure that out? It's incredible. And I'm wondering, I don't know if that's been documented in the Americas as well, or
well, I've spent time with an agronomist, Giuseppe, that studied the history of that, and it's a wonderful example of a traditional ecological knowledge encoded in a parable that in Sicily they say that a young spoiled son of a prince of Sicily was left behind by his father and told to take care of the prickly pear, and he ran out as soon as his father left and knocked them all off to so that he wouldn't have to work the next couple weeks. And when his father came home, the fruits that were then available were huge. And it's sort of like a prodigal son story. He hugs his son and said, "What did you do? You're the best prickly pear manager ever in the family." And the kid was trying to get out of work. But it's both pacing the fruiting, but also allowing the fruit on the plant at any given time to be bigger and higher brick
yeah,
planting and all of that. So it's a wonderful example of what you're talking about.
that's incredible, incredible. Well, one other thing I've really I'm really interested in learning more about that you've begun doing more work on is this idea of desert fragrances, going back to these aromas, these incredible volatile molecules coming off of these plants. What can you share with us about your work on desert fragrances?
Well, I have to say that it took me a long time to figure out a way to reconcile my love of the fragrances that I grew up with in a Lebanese immigrant household um, with my science geek mentality. Like, how could aromas and aromatherapy have much physiological effect on us when it's infinitesimally small number of molecules compared to what we get when we ingest medicine or food? But now we know that some of those aromas that we take in through our nose and our mouth channels begin to be metabolized within 2 minutes of us inhaling them. And it's just lightning fast. And so we also did a floristic survey of Sonoran Desert localities, and many of them have 40 to 60 different fragrant plants, and botanists sort of by crowd data sharing. We identified a whole bunch of plants, and then we looked at their volatile oils that carry these antioxidants, and it exploded about 160 different antioxidants carried by at least 60 volatile oils that then some are emitted year long, some are emitted at the onset of the rains, but they're around us all the time. And many of those are the same volatile oils that the Korean and Japanese scientists involved in forest bathing trails have developed. And you know them because they're very common in all medicinal plants. Limonene, A and B, pinene, myrcene, camphene, lutein. And so those are kind of the volatiles that we identify with evergreen coniferous forests, but they're actually more abundant in a greater number of species in deserts than in those hinoki forests of Korea and Japan, where governments are now spending tens of millions of dollars a year to create trails so that people from the cities can get out part of the day and do walking meditation along those trails, because Japan and Korea have had such, unfortunately, high suicide rates of people working 12, 14-hour days without any contact with nature. So this forest bathing therapy that has become very well documented in Far Eastern Asia, whatever we wish to call it now, is actually something that we can do in other habitats and biocultural landscapes around the world. And so it's not restricted at all to the cloud forests of what we call Salmon Nation or the Pacific North Rim.
So this is an incredibly interesting point, Gary. So would you envision something like, instead of forest bathing around all these conifers, that we could actually have desert bathing, like a evening walk through the desert as
We
medicine? I mean,
already do. My dear
wow.
friend Muffin Ames Burgess has already started to do that in early summer mornings in the Sonoran Desert and Saguaro National Park. And I've designed a garden at the Sonoran Desert Inn and Conference Center, run by a nonprofit that I was on the board of, where we put 60 different species of these native desert plants, plus about a dozen varieties of citrus that came into the Southwest in the 16th and 17th century. And so you sit in this acre-and-a-half courtyard, and you're just immersed in this fragrant osmocosm. And
Wow.
now wonderful health scientist Esther Sternberg has her team measuring the stress levels and their reduction through time by sitting or walking in these gardens using wearable patches. And you know all about the use of that, non-intrusive measurements of stress levels, blood pressure, cortisol levels, and other things. And so Esther's team is taking the gardens that I co-designed with a friend from Seattle and a tree surgeon in Ajo, and really seeing how tangibly we can document their healthful effects.
That's incredible. I'm wondering, Gary, is this a secret to how you are so prolific in your writing? You If you're able to sit in these peaceful gardens, I think I need to come out to the desert to do some writing next.
You know, like your own personal story, sometimes what has been a wound or damage when we are younger becomes a gift to us. And
Yes.
in my case, I had traumatic brain injuries from being thrown from a mule. I had been riding mules for plant exploration in Baja California and thought I needed my own mule. Well, the mule told me that I wasn't quite ready for him, and I now have serious eye damage. I see two images in one eye and one in the other. And and my brain works 15 times as hard. So I can't be on a computer more than 45 minutes before I go
Wow.
bonkers. And so I go out in the garden and I decided to start moving around plants in clusters of fragrance rather than moving around words in clusters of sentences. And I think I'm a happier, more healthful person because of.
No, I think that is a recipe for success, and I'm so glad that, you weren't hurt. Even worse, that's dangerous. I often worry. I've also had my days with stubborn mules and camels. Yeah, it's, it's finding that balance, right?
Yes, it's one
Well,
of those things where one of my friends said, I hate to use vulgar words, but uh, it sounds like the mule kicked your ass, not the other way around.
very Oh, well, one of the things that I so admire about you, Gary, is, in addition to just being, as I mentioned, incredibly prolific and incredibly generous with the way that you share your knowledge through workshops and through your writing and doing things like this podcast. You also have this incredible commitment to working with Indigenous partners, and you've done, a number of projects on plant conservation all the way to sea turtle conservation. And so I was hoping you might be able to share a little bit of, some insights from those journeys and kind of things you've learned along the way.
Well, let's get back to the sacred plant work. When I was very young, I had the unanticipated opportunity of helping some elderly men who were Tohono desert Indian farmers. And one day they said, we're going to stop our field work because we have to prepare to a ceremony. Could you help us cut the firewood we need for a 4-day ceremony, our rain bringing ceremony? And after 2 or 3 days of working, they said, well, be here at 6 o'clock tomorrow for the ceremony. And I said, well, I'm an outsider. I can't. And they said, you're not an outsider if you just helped us 2 days in 110-degree heat. Get ready for it. So I've never been initiated into a tribe or any of that. But I've been blessed by these collaborations with Indigenous leaders. And probably the most um, groundbreaking one is that during the building of the wall along the border, many sacred plants were damaged, including the tall saguaro cacti that all your listeners know from cowboy movies and other films. And I saw Indigenous women just weeping uncontrollably, laying next to one of these 300-year-old cacti, saying, don't they know these are people too? And I thought about that, and I remembered that there are stories that people um, and saguaros are both sentient beings, and that a child who sunk into the earth came back as a saguaro cactus, and that story is that you never heard a saguaro cactus, just like you never heard a child. And so when the wall debate, let's call it that, I won't get political, started to happen, I said, well, okay, is there any way that we can really make sure that this whole project does least harm? So we worked with the Tohono O'odham Tribal Council to pass a resolution, which is one of the first in the United States, that grants a sacred plant legal personhood and keeps it protected from damage by road construction, pipeline construction, or wall construction, with the threat of legal action by the Tohono O'odham Nation and other nations. That's violated. And I think the whole point is that plants have sort of been neglected in thinking through how our religious freedom plays out, that it's guaranteed in our Constitution that Indigenous people, not just Catholics, Jews, and Muslims and Buddhists, have the right to have access to the things that allow them to practice their religious traditions. And so I feel so humbled and honored that I was able to play a small role, my wife as well, with 7 incredible Indigenous leaders from 5 different desert Indigenous communities to give a legal precedent for sacred plants being protected under the U.S. Constitution.
That's incredible. I think it's so smart to think about how do we work within the existing legal frameworks to protect nature and to protect people's rights to engage with nature as part of their religion. That's a tremendous example, Gary.
Well, I just have to say one more thing about it that I know you probably feel teaching just a few miles away from where Martin Luther King Sr. and Jr.,
Hmm.
the Ebenezer Baptist Church. I don't want to see a divide between science and religion, like we're on one side or the other of that
Hmm.
divide. And that any way we can find ways where conservation scientists can work together with people of faith, indigenous, Jewish, Catholic, Buddhist, or otherwise, to care for creation and protect the plants that we're blessed with that we depend upon for our survival, but also for our spiritual depth. We should go out of our way to collaborate to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, and this leads to my next question, and it's kind of a big idea question. And you may already be looks like working towards this with your new sacred plant biocultural recovery initiative. But with someone with your depth of expertise, I'm always curious if resources were not a limit, if money, if man-hours were not a limit, what would be your aspirations for our world considering all that's happening today with biodiversity loss and climate change threats to agriculture? Like what would your aspirations be of a way to support planet and humans?
Yeah. Well, like you, I don't in any way see that helping protect and restore nature is antithetical to taking care of humans.
Mhm.
And the kind of work we're doing in a project here in Sonora that I'm driving up the desert coast today to work on is um, a water, energy, and food nexus project at village level where every family will have uh, built out, and 40 households already have these solar collectors under which they can grow their vegetables and medicinal plants in the shade of the solar collectors. That also increases the
Amazing.
time
Yeah.
in the optimum production of the solar collector. But we're also harvesting water off the solar collector, and we're getting people off the grid after terrible time during COVID where the energy and water to these villages were cut off because people couldn't pay their bills. And so I think with unlimited resources, I think my heart is for the people most in need who've been marginalized, who feel that they're not at the end of the line, but beyond the end of the line. And I just think the rest of my days are going to help them and that their spiritual as well as medicinal and food plant need prioritization from every government, every UN agency, and every person who wants to volunteer on a project in these Earth Share Youth Corps projects where we get kids who are isolated from COVID staying inside. We get them out planting trees and being inoculated with the microbes and the volatile oils on the plant roots um, means that we're not only healing the land, but are healing ourselves. And so those are my priorities to make sure that the vast amount of resources that go to other things that may seem trivial sometimes get redirected to help the hungry, the people in war torn places, and the indigenous people who for so long have been marginalized by our own institutions. And I just have great faith in the young leadership, and I'm spending the rest of my days as a volunteer in service to what they see their priorities are, and whatever they say, I'll follow because I just have so much faith in the youth in our diverse communities all around the world right now.
No, that's incredibly inspirational, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's that faith, that hope, that action to enable change and to support people that are marginalized. That's so important, and for all those out there listening, where can we send them to learn more about these initiatives? Maybe to also learn more about some of the resources that you've produced? Would we send them to GaryPaulNabhan.com? Is that the right place?
GaryNabhan.com,
Okay.
and also to the website of the Borderlands Restoration Network, and to Amazon Conservation Team Network. That's both
Mhm.
of those nonprofits are helping us here with the projects among the Kungkak. Right now, while we're launching the Sacred Plant Biocultural Recovery Initiative, I'm just posting on my Gary Nabhan Facebook page
Mhm.
until a website up and running. And there's about 14 different organizations and 7 indigenous spiritual leader and several faith-based groups that are already coming in to build out this global collaboration. We'll be starting work on the U.S.-Mexico border and in the war-torn Middle East. But I really think that the people just enjoy the incredible number of good resources online, but don't stop there. Volunteer for them. Get your hands dirty, and you'll get blessings that uh, far exceed the amount of time and energy you put into it. We need to be remade by these cross-cultural contacts with people who have always been committed deeply to making the earth their home.
No, that's right. I 100% agree. Don't just read about it. Get out and act. There's lots of ways to engage, and, while healing the planet, you may just find yourself healed a little bit as well. That's great.
You know, there's an odd thing too that faith-based communities in the U.S. own a tremendous amount of land that's been
Mhm.
willed churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples. Catholic Church, 177 million acres around the world. Mormon Church, almost that much in the United States alone. And there could be uh, church gardens and church forests in the United States that are playing a major role in conservation and buffering us from climate change, like the Good Lands Project that Molly Burns is doing with the Pope, but also that we see when we travel to the Ethiopian church forest or the
Mm.
St. Forest that Colin Corey and I saw in Morocco in the Central Atlas Mountains, where for centuries no one's cut a tree
Wow.
or for use of firewood or grace in these places because they know a saint had kept that forest alive and conserved, and that has been an inspiration for people doing the same. And now many of those forests are the only relics of that vegetation time left in North Africa. And I see the same thing in Lebanon, the protection of springs that are really the only freshwater artesian sources of water at the
Mm.
Volcan in times of drought. So the uh, the world of the sacred and the world of nature are one and the same.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Gary. I learned a lot from speaking with you, and I'm sure our listeners did as well. And yeah, you can head over to our show notes, folks, and we'll have those links available for you, where you can learn more, where you can check out some of Gary's books, and also learn more about how to get engaged with some of these volunteer opportunities. Because I mean, we need people to take action. This is incredible. Thanks so much, Gary.
Well, thank you. And no one both inspires me and edifies me as much as you do. You're just a saint among the ethnobotany world. So keep up your good work. We love you.
Thank you, Gary.
Have
You've been li you've been listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious, recorded for you today on Squadcast. You can find this and all of our other episodes at foodiepharmacology.com. You can also find links on our website to our YouTube channel where we have this and many other episodes available in video format. You can also head over to the Buy Me a Coffee page on our website that will allow you to buy me a cup of joe. I need some caffeine, so keep sending those gifts along. It helps us keep the show going, bringing you fun, interesting, engaging educational material on this intersection between food, health, planet to you every week. Thanks so much to our producers, to Rob Cohen and Christine Roth, for bringing us a great show. And thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in each week. Stay healthy out there, and I'll see you next time.